If you Googled his name, which I did, I learned that you're going to meet much more than a Holocaust survivor today. You're going to meet a man that just didn't survive, but a man that's thrived. And his body of work and his life and in his community is one that we can only aspire to reach. You're definitely meeting a very special man. And keep in mind, is it 3 you say, Iron Man?
Yes.
As you watch him and listen to him, he has completed and probably won, or at least placed. He finished 3 Ironman competitions. And if you've ever ridden a bike really hard, or ran really hard, or swam really hard, it hurts badly. And he's completed 3 Ironman competitions. Okay, so you're not just listening to a man who has been there, done that, and experienced something tragic in his life, but he has risen above and taken life and lived it. On behalf of Mr. King and myself, I welcome you all to what is sure to be one of the most memorable mornings in your life. I want to first start by thanking the people that made today's visit take place. Thank you to our new friend, Mrs. Gail Hirsch Rosenthal, the director of the Sarah and Sam Schofer Holocaust Resource Center at Stockton University. Gail, are you nearby? Let's give a round of applause.
One of our students from Stockton University, would you stand up, please? She's still here? There she is! Come forward! Our best and finest is here today to observe our program. This is great. Thank you.
I also want to thank your 8th grade teachers, Mrs. Howley, Mrs. Caffiaro, Mrs. Vader, and especially Mrs. Sutter, for preparing and launching the first ever Holocaust Middle School Museum, and for launching today's guest speaker. And thank you to you, the 8th graders of Lacey Township Middle School, for exploring this important topic with curiosity, with respect, and with reverence. It is a rare and fairly uncommon experience for an American teenager to come face to face with a survivor of the Holocaust. It is also rare to have a Holocaust survivor visit a teenager's school. And it is nearly unheard of for an American teenager to have a conversation with a Holocaust survivor. Today, my Lacey, ladies and gentlemen, you get to experience what most teens your age will never get to experience. A real-time conversation with Mr. Leo Ullman, a Holocaust survivor. It is with great distinction that I introduce to you Mr. Leo Ullman.
Thank you all very much for being here. First of all, I want to pay my respects for the displays that are here, which are really terrific. I'm upset only about the 36 Olympics one because it's Jesse Owens and nobody mentions Marty Glickman. But at any rate, Marty Glickman incidentally was the second fastest runner, and he was kept off the relay team because he was Jewish. My story is about the Netherlands. The Netherlands as a country existed from the 1200s on, and in the 1500s or so, the Netherlands became quite famous for its policy of tolerance. It accepted all religions, and as a result of that, many Jewish people who had been persecuted in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain and Portugal came to the Netherlands and settled there, dating back to Spinoza. Holland was famous for its tolerance. And I'm going to use the word Holland instead of the Netherlands because everybody does. Holland is in fact historically the largest province in the country of the Netherlands. It's now split into North and South Holland, but everybody refers to the Netherlands as Holland, and I will as well. Holland in 1940 had approximately 140,000 Jewish persons. Of those, 85,000 lived in Amsterdam, and of those 85,000, 25,000 were in the diamond business. My mother's family, her parents, had a jewelry business and a diamond cutting business, and they lived very, very well. They lived in a mansion right near the Rijksmuseum. They had chauffeurs, they had maids. They had a very, very good life. And they were fully integrated into Dutch society. They had tons of friends. They didn't know that they were different, and they weren't treated different from anybody else. My father's family is from Germany. My father grew up in Cologne, Germany, and his parents, and many generations before that, were also Jewish. They were not terribly religious, but they were Jewish and celebrated on holy days. My father graduated high school in 1932, and at that point he decided, and his parents decided, that he should go to Holland because things in Germany, once Hitler took over in 32 and 33, were expected to not be very good for the Jewish people. So he came to Holland, and he got a job in a large department store, a Macy's equivalent, in the heart of Amsterdam called the Bijenkorf, which means the beehive, and it's still there. And he got that job, and he started working in the furniture and rug department, where he met my mother's cousin, and my mother's cousin introduced my father to my mother, who at the time was engaged, and at that point, she broke the engagement at some point and pursued my father, or vice versa. In 1936, my parents married in a lavish ceremony in a Jewish synagogue. At that point, my father did work at this department store, and he was soon sent to be a trainee in various countries of Europe and ultimately in the US. In 1938, my parents were traveling in the US, and they were engaged in traineeships at most of the major department stores, at Macy's, Gimbel's, Filene's, Wanamaker's, Rich's, Burdine's, lots of stores. But at that point also, in 1938, Hitler had started his program of acquiring other countries with Germanic backgrounds. He took over Austria, he started taking over Czechoslovakia, and at that point, my parents decided to go back to Holland. They went back to Holland not thinking that Germany would take over Holland, because as late as September of 1939, Hitler had said that he would respect Holland's neutrality as the Germans did in World War I. In World War I, Holland was never taken over by the Germans. Its neutrality was respected, and the Dutch people expected that if there was war in Europe started by Hitler, that this would also mean that the Dutch country would remain neutral and not be invaded. Notwithstanding that, on May 10th, 1940, the Germans came and bombed the city of Rotterdam to smithereens. Rotterdam then and now is one of the largest and most important ports in the world. When they bombed Rotterdam, they killed thousands of people, and they left tens of thousands homeless. Shortly thereafter, the Germans took over all of Holland, And within 4 days, the Dutch government, including the Queen, went into exile in London. At that point, my parents and my grandparents and I had the chance to escape. We went to a fishing port called Ullman, where lots of people were able to buy passage to go to England on fishing boats. If you had coins, silver coins, you could buy passage on a fishing boat, and at that point hope to reach America or Canada via London. A number of my relatives, in fact, were able to do that. We went to that fishing port, and it was chaotic. There was a big boat reportedly taking people to England. It didn't exist. And the small fishing boats did not accommodate many people, and not everyone had the means, the coins to pay for the passage. So it was very chaotic. In the meantime, my grandmother had an earache and I had a toothache, or vice versa, and my parents decided, because I was just 6 months old at the time, that they would, or less than a year old at the time, that they would try to escape on another day when it was a little more restful. The Germans came in and shortly sealed the border to the point where we could not get out. So we were destined to stay in Holland while the Germans occupied our country and our city. At first, life was fairly tolerable in that the Germans, and especially Hitler, always wanted to take over Holland as part of the German Empire. The Dutch people, who were tall and blonde, as I am, you can notice, they were part of the Germanic people and were expected to become part of the Germanic Empire under Hitler's rule. He also very much coveted the Dutch diamond business because it generated a lot of money, a lot of hard currency, and it created riches that he envied. The tolerable situation was that Jews were no longer allowed to practice their religion or to practice their sacraments, but notwithstanding that, things were sort of all right. But at a given moment in February of 1941, the Dutch dock workers, a socialist union, started a strike against the Germans for being cruel to the Jews. This was the only country in which there was a national strike in support of the Jewish people. Hitler's people reacted so viciously to that, they were so angered by that, that they took 425 leaders of the union movement and executed them on the spot. From that point on, living in Holland, and specifically in Amsterdam, was a reign of terror. There were a continuing number of decrees that were issued by the governors of Holland. The first decree was that everybody had to have ID cards, and the ID cards had to have a J on it for anybody that was Jewish. With that J, you were basically not permitted to get food coupons. So it was very important to get fake ID cards, which my parents were able to get. In fact, I had a fake ID card, even at the age of 2 or 3, which permitted my parents to get coupons for food and textiles and so forth. All Jewish people also were required to wear a Jewish star on all of their items of clothing. This was my father's Jewish star. It had to be sewn on the left breast pocket of any item of clothing, and it had to be sewn, it couldn't just be clipped. And it permitted Hitler to demonize the Jewish people. And as a result, the Dutch people, many of whom collaborated with the Nazis, were able to single out the Jewish folks and call them dirty Jews when we walked on the streets. The other decrees started coming almost daily, perhaps weekly, and made life much, much, much more difficult. We were not allowed to have telephones, we were not allowed to have radios, we were not allowed to have bicycles, not allowed to have cars or motorcycles, not allowed to use public transportation, not allowed to leave the city of Amsterdam, not allowed to go to public schools, not allowed to shop in regular stores, not allowed to use the parks, not allowed to become members of sororities or fraternities or any other organizations, not allowed to play sports. So life was very, very difficult, but we were alive. At a given moment starting in July 1942, the Germans started deporting the Dutch people, the Dutch Jewish people. And my father received a notice at the same time as Margot Frank, for example, that they were to show up at a transportation camp and be sent to Germany for a work camp. At that point, the killings had not yet started, and my parents thought that they could survive a work camp. So my father went. In the meantime, they had bought rucksacks and heavy boots and heavy clothes, and they were ready to go to Germany to a work camp because they were young and healthy. But my father went to the train station, and he saw that not only young and healthy Jewish people were being put in cattle cars, but also disabled persons, children, old persons. And he thought that it'd be better if they didn't go to work camp. And at that point, my mother's sister and her family, who the father was very much involved in the resistance against the Germans, they were picked up and taken to a concentration camp. And at that point, my father and mother decided that they had to go into hiding. This was a very, very difficult decision. First of all, they had me. I, at the time, was 3 years old. And they had to arrange for something or somebody to take care of me. Also, they had to find their own hiding place. But more importantly, they had to suddenly decide to no longer live like upstanding, law-abiding, regular persons, but suddenly they became illegals, and as my mother said, they had to learn to live like rats. This was very, very difficult for them, and they had to figure out where they could go. Well, through my mother's sorority sisters, through her welfare efforts, she was able to find a hiding place, which was an attic in one part of Amsterdam. And in the meantime, they had to take care of their very clever, cute, precocious little boy, and that was me, of course, and they had to figure out where I was to go. Well, through the resistance, they were introduced to a young man who took me in, and he and his wife were going through some marital difficulties, and I did not help that situation. So they split up, and I was sent to an orphanage. The father of the young man who took me in at first decided that he wanted to take me back. He sort of liked me, and he was worried about the orphanage. And so he and his wife, who I referred to as Grandma and Grandpa Schimmel. Schimmel is the Dutch word, That was their last name. It's a Dutch word both for mold and a white steed. I don't know exactly why. But they took me in, not knowing who I was and knowing for sure that if somebody discovered that they were hiding a Jewish child, they would be killed instantly. Notwithstanding that, they took that ultimate risk and took me in. At first, I was placed with this family in an apartment in some part of Amsterdam, where they lived a very normal life. My war mother, as I called her, was quite religious. They had an older daughter who was 14 years older than I, and that made a very strange family situation, but I was comfortable. In the meantime, my parents had found this attic hiding place, but my father decided that before they went into hiding, he had better quickly raise some money because they had to pay for their hiding place. The people who took care of me got nothing and had no idea who or what I was. But my parents arranged a hiding place with people my mother knew, and they had to pay for their hiding place. So my father decided that he'd better get some money quickly. And what he did is he went to a rug dealer that he knew. He was in his department store involved as a rug buyer. So he had met a rug dealer, and he went to that rug dealer and he said, you know, I'd like to raise some money quickly. Would you give me some rugs on consignment so that I can go sell them and pay you for them as soon as I sell them? He made that arrangement and was able to sell rugs to German soldiers and German policemen who had taken over the houses formerly occupied by Jewish persons. He was able in that manner to raise quite a bit of money quickly. And then at a given moment, they decided that they couldn't do this anymore. It was on or about March 1st, 1943. So he went back to the rug dealer and he said to the rug dealer, I can't do this anymore. I have to give you the rugs back and go into hiding. And the rug dealer at that point did this. He said to my father, he said, I know you're an infidel, because the rug dealer was a Muslim. He said, I know you're an infidel, but here is a prayer rug, a Muslim prayer rug, which, as you will note, is not permitted to show a face. So there is this symbol for the face and the two hands for praying. And he said, this rug will save you. Allah will save you. And so my parents took this rug into hiding, and we sort of think that maybe it saved them. And they've kept this on their table for all of their lives after the war, and now it's on our piano, and it's very meaningful, as you can imagine, because we think maybe Allah saved us. At any rate, they went into hiding, and I went into hiding, and my parents had no idea where I was, or whether I was alive, or whether I was even happy. But they made a pact among themselves that while they were in hiding, they would not talk about me because it was too painful. And they had to somehow keep their mind going while they were in hiding. And so they would act out stories from Russian novels, and they would act out plays, all silently, because in their hiding place, and this to me is still amazing, in their hiding place they were in an attic. Immediately below them was a couple who went to work during the day. And on the bottom floor, which was one floor above a store, were the people who arranged for my parents' hiding place. And they had two teenage daughters who my parents came to love. At any rate, During that entire 2.5-year period, which it wound up to be, that my parents were in this attic hiding place, the people immediately below them never knew that there were people hiding in the attic above them. So my parents could only move when those people went to work. They couldn't go to the toilet. They had no light or heat. There was only one window in the attic. And somehow they survived all of this. They could only move when the people on the bottom floor would poke the ceiling with a broom handle and tell them that the people in the middle apartment had left. While they were in hiding, they suffered a lot. I, by contrast, didn't suffer a lot. I was comfortable. I don't know that I was ever hungry, but my parents had a very difficult time, especially when the money ran out, because the people who hid them, in fact, were very brutal to them at some point, and especially when the money ran out. And they were also constantly terrified because those two teenage girls who lived in that bottom apartment became friendly with German soldiers. And they would get cigarettes and candy and whatever from the German soldiers. And my parents were always terrified that they might betray my parents. In the meantime, many people in Holland looked for Jewish hidden people because there were large bounties paid to anybody who would betray a hidden Jewish person. For that reason, while I was in the hiding place that I was in, my war parents hardly ever let me out of the house. The only times they would take me out of the house was when they learned there would be a raid. And they would learn that there would be a raid because my war father had a girlfriend who worked in a bar in the heart of Amsterdam, frequented by the Nazis, who were the only ones who had money. And they would learn from them that there might be a raid. And so then they would ship me off to the country, to their son, until the raids were over. My parents, by contrast, of course, could not know when there would be a raid, and there were a couple when they were in hiding. My father, who had been a carpenter after he left his job in the department store because all Jewish people lost their jobs, he learned the carpentry trade and created a false door under the stairway leading to the attic, on which he put shelves with nails and stuff. And they hid behind that door when the Germans would look for hidden Jewish persons. They were very fortunate because what happened in Amsterdam is that the Nazis would block both ends of a block and go door to door looking for hidden Jewish persons. They usually used dogs. And if they had used dogs when my parents were in hiding, of course, they would have been dead. But luckily, they survived. But the problem for my parents was food. After a while, there was no food. The hunger winter was a problem because the Germans no longer sent food to Holland. And during that hunger winter, again, which was the result of a strike by the railroads, because that was ordered by the Dutch Queen in exile. Because of that strike, the Germans no longer sent food to Holland. And as a result of that, 22,000 people died in Amsterdam alone from cold and hunger. So food was a very difficult problem for my parents. My mother, once in a while, would go out and beg, go to her former sorority sisters and try to get some food. But my mother also left once when she had a toothache that was so debilitating she couldn't live with it. So she decided that she would just go at dusk and go to the street where there were a known number of dentists, and she went to one of these dentists and she said, I can't tell you who I am, I can't tell you my name or where I came from, and I have no money, but I have this terrible toothache, and could you perhaps help me? And the dentist did help her. At that time, there was no electricity anymore, so the wife of the dentist operated a drill with a foot pedal that was much like the old style sewing machines, for example. And in that manner, he drilled, and he told her that she had to come back in a couple of days to have the stitches taken out, etc. And she did come back a couple of days later, and not only did he take the stitches out, but he gave her a loaf of bread, which was worth anything. So my father never did get out, incidentally. So they survived somehow all of this, and the war ended on May 10th, 1945. I'm sorry, on May 5th, 1945, I apologize. And on that day, even though the war had ended, there were some German soldiers who took over a balcony on the main square of Amsterdam, and as a last act of retribution against the Dutch, shot and killed dozens and dozens of people who were celebrating, wounded hundreds who were celebrating the end of the war, just as a last vicious act. It was shortly after that my parents came to pick me up. And they came. My father had feet that were swollen like this. He had edemas because he had not walked during that entire time. And he came to the apartment, and he and my mother had been told where I was hiding by somebody in the resistance. And they came to the apartment and rang the doorbell. And I was there with my war mother. And my war mother, of course, knew immediately who it would be. And I only saw these two terribly gaunt and sick-looking, very, very thin people who claimed to be my parents. I didn't know them. I didn't remember them. I was only 3 years old when they left, and I'd been with my war parents for 2.5 years. So this must have been very, very difficult for everybody. Not only my real parents, but also for my war parents, with whom I'd become so close. At any rate, these new parents took me to their hiding place, and they had saved, during this terrible hunger period, they had saved for the day that their son would come. They had saved a can of baked beans under the floorboards that they were not to touch until and unless their son came. So I came to the apartment with them. I first made them stand in line for hours to get an orange hat. Everybody in Holland was celebrating the end of the war wearing orange. Anything orange that they could find, you hung out of the windows and you put on your clothes. Why would they do that? Who knows why they would wear anything or do anything with the color orange? Yes, sir.
It was like the color of the monarchy.
It was, you're absolutely right. The Dutch Queen and the Dutch monarchy was the House of Orange. And so if you ever see a Dutch team in the Olympics or in any other sport, they will always wear orange. And it's the one thing that hangs above the Dutch flag. So everybody wore orange and everybody was celebrating. I made my poor parents stand in line for I don't know how long to get me an orange hat. And then we came to their hiding place, which of course was much less attractive than where I was in hiding. And with great ceremony, they opened this can of baked beans. And they gave it to me, and my reaction was, "Ugh, I hate baked beans." That was a little embarrassing, but when you're a kid, you say stupid things sometimes. At any rate, then they took me back to my war parents because they had made an arrangement that they wouldn't take me immediately. They'd wean me away over a period of days. They took me back to my war parents, where everybody on the block had come to celebrate and have a party. And my war parents kept me in basically during the entire war, thinking that nobody on the street knew that they had a hidden Jewish child. Turns out everybody on the street knew, and nobody betrayed us. Then I went with my real parents, and I went to their apartment, and shortly thereafter my father got a job back at his old department store. He got some money for the time that he had lost his job, and through some luck and some pull, they were able to get a house. My father had a job, they got a little car, and life was somewhat comfortable after the war. But my father, in the meantime, never had any citizenship. He lost his German citizenship because they took away all the citizenships of Jewish people from Germany. He never got Dutch citizenship because the Dutch country, like you see today with many of the countries in Europe, the Dutch did not want all these German refugees, so he was never able to get a Dutch passport either. But somehow they were able ultimately to get to the US because my mother's sister sponsored us, and we came to the US 2 years after the war. Why would they leave Holland? Even though he got his job back, he had a nice house, they had a comfortable living. The reason was, believe it or not, my father was so afraid that the Russians would come and take over Holland, because at that point, after the war, the Russians controlled all of Eastern Europe. Eastern Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Balkan countries, the Hungary, Austria, Romania, Bulgaria, you name it, all controlled by the Russians. And they were just a couple of 100 kilometers from Amsterdam. And my father thought that not under any circumstances would he want to be living in another occupied country. So they came to the US, and we got here, and life became relatively comfortable. I think I'd like to end it there and ask for your questions if you have some. And I understand you might have some.
Yes, I'm just going to get the mic. I believe it's been fixed.
Okay.
Questions from Sean? They're going to be next to start it out. Thank you so much. Stand up.
My name is Kylie Ferguson, and it mentions that your dad works at a department store. It says the name, but it doesn't say the name of your mom's diamond cutting business. What was it called?
Of the which business?
The diamond cutting business.
The diamond cutting business, it no longer exists. It was called S&S Konijn. My mother's family was Konijn, which is the Dutch word for rabbit. So I wanted a rabbit just because I think it might be my relatives, but it was S&S Rabbit, and it was taken over ultimately by a diamond business that still exists called Asher. So if you go to Holland and you go to Schiphol Airport, you see 1 million advertisements for Asher, and somewhere in there are remnants from my grandfather's business, we think. And my grandfather and his brother ran this business, and they married on an arranged wedding 2 sisters. So 2 sisters married 2 brothers who didn't know each other, and they lived happily until my grandfather died early. His brother and his family were taken off to concentration camp and killed.
More questions? Sean, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Sean. I
Hello,
would
Sean.
love to know how you felt when you met your biological parents after living with your war parents for 2.5 years.
Right. It's a fair question, but I don't know that I really have the answer because at the time, when the war ended, I was six years old. I'd been with my war parents for 3 years, but I never knew really or didn't remember my real parents because I was so young. So I was upset that I had to leave my regular war parents to be with my real parents. But the good thing is, and it's made my life easier, and it's one of the things that's been very important to me, is that my war parents stayed in my life. My war father took me to school during the days after the war. I saw them regularly. They gave me the dog that we had in the apartment. So they were very important to me. And I should mention, which is really sort of special, and it literally took place yesterday, the people who took care of me, and also another family that took care of my parents and extended family, were advised yesterday by a letter that I received that those people will be honored at Yad Vashem as righteous of all nations and inscribed on the wall at Yad Vashem. Took a lot of work, and it should have happened 50 years ago, but I stayed very close to those people, and in April of this year, their grandchildren and the widow of my war brother are coming to our town, and we're going to have a big celebration. And I'm going to talk and tell the same story I'm telling you at that point. But it'll be pretty special because we have remained close with those people. They're very important to us. And if you take a family picture of our family, there's 16 of us, if you count 4 sons-in-law and my wife. But for those people who rescued us, 12 of those people wouldn't be here, including myself. So it's very important to us.
Thank you very much. Another question? Megan?
My name is Megan, and my question to you is, have you visited your old hiding spot since the war?
Yes, I have gone there. I haven't been inside. I have been to the apartment house several times. It's now occupied by lower income families. It was never very upscale. But yes, I did go back, and I also went to see the hiding place that my parents were in. I went back because I practiced law for 30 years, and my clients, a large number of them, were primarily Dutch, because I still read, write, speak Dutch, and I went back to Holland after law school and worked there a couple of years, or a year and a half. I purposely kept that all up. And so as a result, I would go back and forth 10, 12 times a year. So I did not only see those places, but other places that were meaningful to my family. Thank you.
Another question?
I'm Juliet, and when the Holocaust is brought up, what feelings and thoughts go through your mind at that moment?
That's a good question. Again, the thing is that while I'm a survivor, I never knowingly suffered. I was never hungry that I know of. I ate sugar beets and tulip bulbs, which the Dutch people were very upset about, but I never knew anything else. And I don't have feelings of immense anger and upset because, again, I never suffered. But of course, my parents suffered a lot. And they have had feelings, and for many years, they never talked about it. It was a very, very difficult time. You have to appreciate that while they were up in this attic hiding place, every step, every motorized vehicle, every noise could have been the end of their lives. And to live under that type of terror is just unimaginable. But at any rate, so they basically never talked about it until on the occasion of their 40th wedding anniversary, after a lot of prodding by my brother and myself. My mother wrote their story, and it opened up their lives completely. It was cathartic. From that point on, they could always talk about it, didn't bother them. So I don't think that it affected us in a bad way. What was important to us when we came to America was to get away from this background. And it was very important to all of us to become assimilated as much as we could, to become part of society. My parents were extremely active in all sorts of civic and charitable activities. I have been in my own way. And it was very important to get away from what was behind us, and they were able to do that. On the other hand, I have first cousins who were shipped off to concentration camp and somehow survived, and I don't think there's a day that goes by, at least even not an hour for one of my cousins, that they don't think of their suffering and how difficult it was for them. And they're under tremendous psychiatric care as a result.
More questions?
Yes?
Way in the back?
Hi, I'm so my question to you is, we all were really during the war, but did you know that all this was happening? That you were kind of Jews were going into concentration camps, that people were suffering? Did you know that?
No. In terms of my personal situation, I was too young. I knew that planes were flying over, and I knew that there were German soldiers walking on the streets, but I didn't know about the war as such. Appreciate again that after a while, not only Jewish people, but no one was allowed to have a radio. But a huge number of people did secretly put a radio above the ceiling tiles or whatever, and they listened to the Dutch Queen in exile, who had a radio program, Radio Orange, and they listened to Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was very, very important to the Dutch people for keeping up their spirits. The Dutch absolutely loved Winston Churchill because in many respects he gave them hope when things were very difficult. So I personally didn't know what was going on. And in terms of the concentration camps, people really did not know, including the leaders of the Dutch Jewish community, who were charged with sending people by train to German concentration camps. They did not know that they were killing camps until much later.
More questions?
Like you said, you never really knew that the war was going on because you were younger, but
I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing because
Can you speak with your drama voice?
you said that you were young, like when you were in hiding, and that you didn't really know what was going on, but when you did find out like what happened, how did you react? Like what was going through your head?
Okay. I don't know when I really found out what happened. It probably, I came to the U.S. when I was in 3rd grade. At that point, I didn't know very much. And again, it was very important for us to get away from what we had gone through. So it was never discussed. Through high school, through prep school, through the U.S. Marine Corps, through college, I never stressed my background as a hidden Jewish child. I always wanted to be assimilated. My parents the same way. They abandoned their Jewish religion, in part because they wanted to become assimilated when we came to the U.S. and started a completely new life.
More questions? They had so many.
Excuse me, we love you. Is that a question or are you waving?
I was waving at Mr. Center, but I had a bunch of questions for you, Mr. Ullman. I'm Laura Bader. I'm one of the 8th grade English teachers. And the kids were all wondering, in your book when they read that you went into 3rd grade, the principal said, it'll be all right, he'll get beat up, and then he'll be fine. So they were all wondering, did you get beat up?
I think I probably did, but you know, it wasn't to the point where I couldn't function anymore. And I do remember those years as being wonderful. We had tons of friends. We had a park nearby and a haunted house and a pond, and we played endlessly with lots of friends. So I don't know that I didn't get along at that point. I did mention in the earlier session that the same teacher who said that, you know, at first the other kids would beat me up, but then it would be okay, that same principal was also important in my life in a way. My mother went to that principal and said that I was acting up. I was just not paying attention in school. I was just with an ADD problem, I think. And so this principal, who was as practical on this advice as she was with the advice on learning English, this was incidentally long before teaching English as a second language, and ESL and TESOL, if those programs are still around. But this principal said to my mother that she should stand outside daily with a stopwatch. And when I came home, I was to run around the block, and she was to time me. And I thought I was the world's greatest runner, and it turns out that this was only to get me tired, and so I would behave a little better. So that's sad. I really thought I could run.
She prepared you well for those Ironman.
The Ironman, you know, the running part of it is a marathon. After you've biked 112 miles and swum 2.5 miles. And you don't run a marathon, you do a marathon. You know, you get through it somehow. Anyway.
I also knew that some of the students were interested in your rooming certain times. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The worst problem for me in the Marine Corps is that my formal name is Leopold Solomon Ullman. So every day at roll call, there'd be Tom Smith and Dave Jones and so forth, and then Leopold Solomon Ullman. I mean, it was awful. I felt I had a bigger burden to carry than others. I learned a lot in the Marine Corps. I took one term off from college. I went to Harvard. I took one term off from college and made up the term and went into the Marine Corps for 6 months active and then 5.5 years reserve. I learned more in the Marine Corps than I did at Harvard by far. Not even close. You have to get along. The one thing that I have nightmares about still is that we would be on the parade grounds for hours, just all sorts of complicated marching maneuvers, which we did just to learn to accept orders without question. After you've been marching on that parade ground in the brutal heat of Paris Island, suddenly they let you go to the bathroom. And there are 72 people in a platoon or in a company, and there are 8 toilets and no doors. So you have 8 rows of 9 people cheering for you to get through the bathroom somehow, and you can't go when this happens. So that's my worst memory of the Marine Corps. the other thing is, I could tell you my favorite story. Can I tell you a favorite Marine Corps story?
You would love it.
At one point, of course, you can't shoot one another while you're in training. So they divided us into the blues and the reds. And I was a red, and I was in a foxhole in front of the rest of my company. And we were given the following instructions. If you see somebody from the other side, a blue in this case, you should point your rifle and you yell out, "Bang, bang!" If they get closer, you pretend that you're going to throw a grenade and you yell out, "Boom, boom!" And if they get closer than that, you put on your bayonet with the scabbard on your rifle and you go up to the fellow and you yell out, "Swish, swish!" Those were the instructions. So I'm in my foxhole, and suddenly a fellow in blue starts coming across the field ahead of me. And so I point my rifle and I yell out, "Bang, bang!" And he keeps walking. And I yell out, "Boom, boom!" And he keeps walking. And finally, I go with my bayonet fixed on my rifle. I go up to him, I yell out, "Swish, swish!" And he still keeps walking. So I grab him by the lapels and I say, "I yelled out bang, bang. I yelled out boom, boom. And I yelled out swish, swish. And you keep walking." And he looks at me very calmly and he says, "Rumble, rumble, I'm a tank." That's my birthday story.
Any final questions before we finish? Yes, Jackie.
I'm Jackie. And would you want like some moments in your life where the change didn't happen?
I don't think so. I've been terribly lucky. I married a sweetheart from 7th grade. We were both in 7th grade together. Instead, you should look around and this could happen to you. So I missed the whole dating scene and probably didn't learn a lot about women. Other than that, I think I was terribly lucky. I had a wonderful education. I've had a good career. We've had a good life. I have 4 children and 7 grandchildren, all of whom are doing fine. So I wouldn't change very much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ullman. He remarked to us on the side just how polite the Lacey Township Middle School students are during such an interesting topic, and again, I praise you for that. Thank you. All right, that concludes our program. Let's give one big round of applause.